that is how we heal, through someone witnessing those wounds, witnessing that story, witnessing that shame. In the light, it transforms. I help people to shed the narratives that are keeping them blocked from really embodying the narrative that they want to tell. So who they are in truth. So living from that self-led place, that true self, that authentic self. So kind of peeling back the layers that stand between you and between your persona, your ego, and that true self. And those are kind of the parts. And so I do many different, I would say that my work, I call it story work, is really a synthesis of, a decade and a half of research and studying and my own experience, which we'll obviously get into, but like my own personal healing history, healing story. But yeah, so I story work is really a synthesis of various modalities, including internal family systems, obviously, as well as somatic work, and hypnosis, as well as narrative therapy. So that's using the concept of our own personal story in written form, as well as some shamanic work that I did during my graduate studies, learning about indigenous processes that help release stories from the body, release trauma from the body. But yeah, so it's really it's quite a combination. There's definitely nothing like story work that exists. That's why I created it. I really created it because I needed it personally. And that was very much mirrored in all of my clients in the beginning. So yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And some quick definitions for people who are unfamiliar with this stuff. What does somatic mean?
So somatic, when I speak about somatic, it's so some studies that I've done is around somatic experiencing, or somatic therapy, which is somatic. The soma is really the Latin word is body. So it's the concept, or I would say truth is, and we know this through neuroscience, is, and neurobiology, is that trauma and experiences are all held in the body. So the subconscious lies within the body. And so with somatic therapy, you're really getting in touch with the body and allowing these experiences, these memories, these traumas to be released physically from the body. And so there's various somatic practices that really help do this. And this framing, as well as other framings, really kind of holds my story work practice.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that, I guess, for people who always need the references to how this connects to mainstream literature, that's The Body Keeps the Score is the really famous book that explains. It's like a Harvard doctor who is working with Vietnam PTSD people and explaining how it's like trauma is
stored in the body. Yeah, and we know this through animal studies as well. And there's a practice, a really powerful practice that's also part of my work, which is shaking trauma, TRE. I don't know if you're familiar with trauma retention release exercises, which is the physical shaking from the body. And so we know that through animal studies, like when animals have a fright, that sounds funny, when they experience trauma, like we do as well as kids, we shake. But the thing is that through conditioned narratives, through the way that we're conditioned as we grow up, we stop that shaking. And so that means the energy is somatically held within the body and it's not released. And so we can do these practices to physically release this from the body. And so the shaking, what it's actually doing is it's shaking the psoas muscles. The psoas muscle is between our hips at our pelvis, and this is the fight or flight muscle. And so we're doing this specific form of shaking that's really releasing trauma stored within the psoas. And this is why I'm such a neuroscience geek, neurobiology geek, because it really helps me ground these concepts with what I consider truth, which, science and studies and indigenous, things that are collectively experienced are what I consider truths. When something shows up in multiple cultures, so this concept of releasing physically from the SOAS, this fight or flight muscle, is literally moving the energy, because in what we know is that contraction, when we have trauma, there's a contraction. And so that contraction holds the memory. And so when we release it, then energy can flow.
Yeah, that's so funny. The first podcast I ever posted with Him, I'm talking about this because on the way to recording the podcast with him, I'm riding a bike and I fall off or something, and then I just learned about shaking, how it's what animals do to then show the body it's safe. So then I stood up and shook it off, which I was like, this will look so weird if anyone's looking. But it's also just who cares? No one is actually paying that much attention, as we're talking about before we start recording. And it just makes so much sense because your body, suddenly tensed up or tightened or whatever, and then you're shaking it off to that's a phrase,
exactly.
Shake it off. It's literally, you can relax, it's fine, the danger's gone.
Yeah, because it's when we don't release it, then the memory is stored. And so a memory is the same energetically. It's an energetic frequency, and that frequency is then held within the body, and then it informs your body story, i.e. your life story, through what is being held or not discharged from the body. And that's also where our subconscious lies. And then I often speak about the lens, the lens we see the world through. And this is, that's a physical manifestation of somatic experiences, as well as, which is manifested from earlier life experiences that were just too much, it was just too much for the body to handle or the being to handle. That's what trauma is. Mm-hmm.
And then what is IFS?
So internal family systems is a psychotherapeutic approach that really considers the truth that we have a multiplicity of parts, a multiplicity of consciousnesses. We are not one person. I am not Julia. I'm a multiplicity of various aspects of myself. And again, we often use this kind of language. Often you come across it when you're making a decision, and it's, part of me wants to do this, part of me is scared about going. This is what we mean by parts. I think we used to have this narrative around multiple personalities, some people are schizophrenic. No, we all are. And when you start doing this work, not all schizophrenic, but we all have the multiple parts, which is what makes us beautiful and human, and complex, and have a personality, and, have preferences. It's all of these different parts of us. But what happens through trauma, through pain or conditioning, is certain parts are created that take on a role that is not their true role, their true nature. So it's almost like, and in the hypnosis space, you kind of see these different parts, kind of like a play. You can close your eyes. I'm sure, when we did our little session together, I'm sure you kind of saw it, and, there's different characters. And there are no bad parts. I mean, that's a really important message to really take home, is that there are no bad parts of us. There's parts that have transformed their supportive role for the system into an unsupportive role that they too don't want to play. And so we unburden this role, through looking at the origin story and healing the origin story through some inner child work with that part. And then the part is able to then transform and take on its true role. That is also supported for the system. And so there's parts, and then there's self. So the parts can include exiled parts, which are those wounded inner child parts. And then those inner child parts, a protector is created to protect that inner child exile. So when you say, oh, I'm triggered, what that actually means is your exile, your wounded inner child, is touched upon. And then that pain makes the protectors say, oh my God, we have to protect you. That's really scary. And then they jump on. So inside of every protector, there's an exile. And then there's 2 different types of protectors. So the way that I'm describing this is the internal family systems model. But this idea of parts work is spoken about in every spiritual tradition, every form of therapy. It speaks about parts of us. Not every, but most. And so the way that I, really, the internal family systems model, specifically Richard Swartz's model, really resonated with me. And so this is the way that I describe it. And so in the protective parts, there's managers and there's firefighters. And so you can think of a firefighter. That's why I love IFS, because it's so simple. A firefighter puts out the fire. So it's one that's reactive.
So would that be, I'm thinking of a classic example of like, you're feeling, something happens, you have a bad day and you're feeling emotions. And then a part of you is like, let's soothe by eating like really bad food or like drinking or doing something that another part of you is like, no, I don't want to keep doing that. Like, this is harming me, but this part's really strong and takes over and is like, let's eat like 5 donuts right now.
Exactly. So it's that reactive. So one's reactive and one's preemptive. Manager is preemptive. So a manager is something that keeps us in line. So maybe a perfectionist part, maybe a manager. Really controlling, something that allows you to kind of, or the often the part that, you feel more regulated when you exercise 6 days a week for 30 minutes a day. Okay, so that's a concept. So there's a manager part, right? And then that kind of does that. And then if you don't do that, then another part, the critical, you piece of shit, like, there we go. There's another protector, but that's more the firefighter, the one that comes in after the effect. And then the other aspect of this work is, and again, it is a commonality in every spiritual and as well as religious tradition, is this concept of self. So self is not a part. It's an essence. It's our true nature, authentic self. So many words for it. But it's really self with a capital S. So it's not the egoic self. So the egoic self, you could maybe think about, are the parts. So the ego, the persona, again, whatever you want to call it. And then the self, the essence, the true self, the true nature. And this, again, through the work that, Richard Swartz found, as well as, like I'm saying, every spiritual tradition. And also this work is very informed by Buddhism. So, a lot of these phrases, a lot of mindfulness kind of phrases is very much also resonant and infused within this specific modality. So self, again, has characteristics that are found in every human. So self, irrelevant if someone is on death row, like he works with people on death row, child molesters, almost like the worst, quote unquote, of our society. everyone has self. It's unbreakable, indestructible, from birth. It's our true essential nature. And it holds the only, what I believe, and this is quite a statement, but I'm okay saying big statements. I think it is the only truths that exist really in the world are that we are whole, we are worthy, we are perfectly imperfect beings. And so the work, and really our most abundant creative nature, manifestations, everything comes from accessing and cultivating a deeper relationship with self, with this essence, with our, whole, with the one, not one, but, we are one individual in a perfect puzzle of the universe of life. And we all have one puzzle piece within the greater cosmic world. And that is non-repeatable. There is no one else that's like you. And so it's really about finding that authentic, who is that authentic self? And then allowing your life to be guided by self rather than the parts. Because that's what happens, is the parts take the microphone and they start, everything that you see, you hear, you feel is through the lens of that part. So if it's not through self, then it's through that part. And so when we unburden it, we allow that part to take its true rightful seat at the, in the orchestra of our symphony, or the back of the bus where it wants to be, and self is driving the bus or is being the conductor and conducting these different parts when to play in an unburdened self, in an unburdened way. Then our life is effortless and beautiful, and we're happy, and we're able to manifest our aligned experiences, relationships, and just feel a greater sense of self. So yeah.
And with the death row example, that's that's like a part who has committed some crime or whatever for them to end up there. And it's so interesting because I had this experience. I ended up in a group IFS session. I didn't know it was going to be IFS anyway. And then I ended up with this group of people who I'd never met before, and we were doing IFS. And it was so interesting because there was a woman there who had this part that had strongly believed something from childhood, that people will hurt you. We're in the animal kingdom. This is what she said. It's like, we're in the animal kingdom and you have to fight to survive. And if you don't exert power over, not that she'd done anything, well, I don't know that she'd done anything violent, but it was kind of like, if you don't do this to protect yourself, other people will hurt you. And so it was like, that was a part of her who, by some experience, had learnt that. And so you can see why and same for suicidal parts. It's like that part, it's a protector. That part is protecting you from pain. So it's trying to provide you a solution. So same with a part that's violent, who's saying like, you have to do that. It's trying to protect you. And it's...
Yes. And it's a completely different narrative. Talk about shifting the global narrative towards mental health. It's, we all have all of these parts. We know this through archetypal, the parts are also archetypes. So we all have a suicidal part. We all have a depressive part. They just may be burdened or unburdened to certain degrees, and it really allows for a true understanding and empathy for humanity and for everyone and for people's experiences, because when we can see that part in someone else, that's allowing us to see that part within us and allow it to not take over and become burdened. I have this beautiful deck, this Caroline Mess archetypal cards deck, and it's all of the archetypes. It's the same as It's the same as Jungian archetypes, and you can think about this in the same way as the parts. Depressive part. You are not depressed. And talk about something that's so empowering. When I first learned that, it's like, I'm not depressed. I have a depressed part. And even that tiny reframing in your own experience is like, changes everything. It's a complete paradigm shift of your own life experience, because when you are feeling that depressed state, you're like, oh, I have a depressed part that's really showing up right now. What does he need? Not I am depressed, which is all engulfing, all encompassing, And so it's, from that perspective, it's the most empowering and truly transformative, because we are relational beings. We heal through relationships. We live through relation. And so through relating differently to your own internal narratives, as well as those parts, it allows it to transform and no longer take over. And so, that was my personal experience, as well as working with loads of people.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into your personal experience and what led you to become a therapist, I guess. So, beginning with how you grew up.
Yeah. I feel like if you asked me that question a few years ago, it would be slightly different. But yeah, I believe that this is my puzzle. This is my piece in the puzzle in the universe of life. I think my whole experience of life from an early age was really riddled with a lot of pain, a lot of trauma. My life's curriculum was quite tough, very tough. But that all was really for my becoming, for me to really learn. I had to learn at the embodied sense to be able to support others. And so becoming a therapist, and however this continues to unfold, is my life's purpose. This is not a job. This is who I am as a whole being. So I guess I was raised half in England. I was born in England, but I grew up in California. We moved around a lot. I was raised by a mother that had a lot of mental health issues, still does. And there was a lot of narcissistic abuse relationship within there, a lot of severe depression and anxiety, and kind of control. And I was a very sensitive, I am a very sensitive being, which is also a gift. It never felt like a gift. It always felt like a massive burden. But now I'm able to kind of transmute that into a gift, see it as a gift. But I think as a result, and also many other things, I really took on the energy and kind of took in my physical body the chaos and the trauma that was just existing and constant throughout my early years. I also experienced a very severe trauma before I was 1, at the hands of my mother. And so from a really early age, there was a lot of fragmentation, pain within my system, emotional, physical, and spiritual pain.
How did you find out about the trauma?
Well, it's a burn. I guess the physical trauma was it's obvious. It's on my body. And yeah, I mean, as I've done more of my own healing, different memories. Obviously, I have no memory of it, but I've kind of, there's certain memories that kind of are continuing to come back, and I'm healing it. And really learning the wisdom, because that's pain and trauma is really a wound that allows so much healing and light and wisdom. And I'm through all of this work, I guess my own journey, I'm learning that wisdom.
Did you have siblings?
Yeah, I'm the youngest, and so I have an older brother and older sister. And yeah, so I guess in my early years, I had all of the time till I was late 20s, I had chronic physical pain, as well as, I didn't realize, it's interesting what you don't know, but I didn't realize that I had like chronic anxiety, depression. I just had no idea because it was never lifted. I never experienced what it felt on the other side. When something is very much within you, you don't know until you experience the opposite. And so, yeah, there was just a lot of nervous system dysregulation that obviously now I was manifested in a lot of physical disease and illness. And so I kind of came into my healing work as a nutritional therapist. So I kind of started that way. It's like, okay, let's heal the body. I have a physical problem, let's heal the physical body. And I really went into nutritional therapy, hormone therapy, a lot of studying all this way. And I guess to kind of keep it short and succinct. So I worked in that way with physical pain, chronic illness, not only in my own experience, but working with clients. And then after a few years, I really realized that it's so similar, well, completely mirroring my own experience was my clients, which was the physical manifestation was really a expression of underlying unhealed emotional, psychological, spiritual trauma. And so that kind of realization and seeing the connection really led me to kind of retrain in some of these emotional release work and IFS, and really working with that underlying emotional side, psychological kind of abuse side or trauma side. And then the physical just transformed. And so this kind of connection between physical, like the physical manifestation, the physical creation, whether or not we see it in terms of the physical, almost quantum field work that we're doing, like creating a reality, or the reality of our body, is all the physical manifestation of what is inside. And so the external is a complete mirror to the internal world. So whatever that is inside is what is going to show up physically. And so for me, it was a lot of pain. It was that invitation to look deeper at that pain. And so I guess, I started looking at IFS through the physical lens, which is kind of gaining a little bit of understanding now, but not, it's still quite unusual to be doing parts work on physical body parts. But that's not a whole other thing, but it's really fascinating when you start speaking from, for example, your vulva. You really learn a lot from that.
Or I guess you can also do it speaking, like if you have a headache and it's exactly. Like asking the headache.
Why is it here? What are you here to show me? What role are you playing? Where did this come from? And how can we help you heal? And then you start to see that heal.
Which might sound like crazy, but it can be as simple as if you take the time and you ask, it might say, and you literally, you need to write it down or something. It's easy to write down. It might say slow down, you are doing way too much, can you take a break? And then it's oh, thank you, this is a message. I do need to do that.
Especially in the chronic pain community, there's a lot of work around neurobiology of pain, what creates pain, what creates physical manifestation. And it's really that when you have a pain experience, when you feel chronic pain, which is obviously very different than normal pain, in its different in the different qualities, then it really makes you actually have to sit down and rest. So you see how it's protector, because it's protecting. And so, yeah, like the chronic pain, the chronic illness community is is a population that I'm really passionate about working with, but I also work with other people that don't and just want to. I work with a lot of artists and creatives around just unburdening those parts that are preventing them from accessing their creative core, which is, creativity also comes from self. That is a quality of self, our true self, our authentic self. There's in IFS we say the 8 C's: compassion, creative, courageous, calm. These are all qualities.
Curious is
Yes.
my favorite one.
Yeah.
Because there could be a part of you that you don't like, but that's a different part that doesn't like it. So there's a part, like a lazy part or something. It's like, why can't I go to the gym? And this other critical part is like beating the other part up. But when you get curious, then you're in yourself and you're curious of like, why is this part of me like that?
Right. And just really starting to note, based on these qualities, am I in a part or am I in self? And what allows me to come into self? What do I do? Who am I with? What am I, what allows me to be in that space? In the nervous system world, we sometimes call these glimmers, which are like, what, rather than a trigger, so trigger and glimmer, the opposite side. So what brings you into that space, or allows you to connect to that part of you, not part of you, that true nature. And just like a funny invitation for your podcast listeners is just open up a notes page. Open up a notes on your phone. Just start writing down what brings you into self. And then also what triggers you out of it. Because the truth is that we can all live with work, especially nervous system work and this parts work. We can live in that state. It's really hard to imagine. And I know for me, as the time goes and I'm continuing on my journey of healing and greater integration, which is one and the same, is I'm experiencing so much more of actually what it's like to live more from self, and witnessing those parts that were too wounded to even come out. The creative, the fun, the playful, the messy, all the beautiful things and the parts of us that weren't allowed to be cultivated. So I feel like that we need a rebrand of therapy work, because it's seen as such a negative, like, oh, you gotta get in the deep, you gotta get in there. You do, but I don't know, it's like the reward is incredible. Like you're bringing forth so much more of who you actually are. All the parts that weren't there, which we all have, but have just been wounded out of the way.
Yeah, so rather than it's like there's something wrong with you, which is maybe how a lot of people get into it. Like how
we all
a lot of people start
invitation.
Yeah, so it's like you're not functioning. Oh, that was my pathway. Can't function. So need like not capable of working, need intervention. So go to therapy. But then it's like, oh my God, it makes your life, and especially this type of therapy, it makes your life so much better. And rather than like, as well, that's what we're talking about with labels, like rather than a diagnosis, like, oh, there's something wrong with you, take this medicine and then it's fixed. It's like, oh no, this is something that everyone deals with, and you can do the work, and then it like adds to your life. Like it's not about like putting a band-aid on a wound. It's like, living a more fulfilled, free life better relationships, like better, just like, and then I think it rubs off on other people, right?
100%, because we are energetic beings. So the chemistry of our body is created by what's inside of it. So of course, the energetic frequency that you're putting out is a composite of the chemistry internally, as well as how you see, the lens you see, and whether or not you want to speak in nervous system terms, like the nervous system state you're in, which is also a complete correlation to your parts versus self, as well as attachment theory. I mean, everything is really mapped onto parts. And that's a whole conversation, and another conversation itself around attachment theory and parts, nervous system states, which I feel like really needs to be spoken about. But it's like the more that you connect to self and start living in that way and bringing forth more of those creative, that playful, that's allowed to be there. I mean, not only your relationships change, but you're actually choosing appropriate relationships, healthy relationships. And just, your digestion changes. I mean, when I'm saying the physical, I guess I like the physical because there's proof. There's like almost proof in the pudding, and I know how much my physical experience of life has changed, as well as the stuff I can't really conceptualize, like what's happening in my own personal manifestation right now of, building my work, allowing more opportunities, more really aligned opportunities, things that I could never imagine could happen are just coming with such effortless ease. I'm not trying. I said to a friend the other day, I'm almost embarrassed to say how much I work a day because, well, first of all, none of the work that I do is work, but some of the back end is work. And it just is coming with such ease because the frequency that I'm creating is a completely different chemistry. And we know through hermetic principles, through, the certain principles of the universe, magnetism is a principle. Attraction, that like attracts like. So our internal chemistry attracts the external to match it. And so this is why, manifestation in the way that it's talked about in certain communities is that's why. I mean, that's why we can manifest something as well as the physical manifestation. Do you see?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, I mean, people can just find evidence of that in everyday. Like, if you're feeling better, if you're feeling more confident, you're feeling more positive or whatever, and then you're smiling, and then someone, you like attract people who want to talk to someone who looks like they're smiling and happy and, and then opportunities come to you that verse on a day when you're like, everything's going wrong, and then it's like things keep getting worse.
Right.
Okay, so going back to you.
Yeah.
And so what was school like for you? And where did you do most of your schooling?
Yeah, I mean, another thing that just effortlessly changed that I had no idea, I never thought about it. But that's kind of what happens. You start doing the work, you start doing some of this real deep unconscious work. Things just effortlessly change. You don't even know. And talk about how was my experience at school. These are quotes like, I'm dyslexic, ADHD. I mean, like, those challenges, those are parts. Those aren't, it's not who we are. It's parts that heal. And so school was really challenging, but I love to learn, and challenge myself, I guess. I first studied psychology and neuroscience down in Brighton. So I finished high school. I grew up I guess most of high school, or all of high school, I was in California in a little town called Ojai, down south, which is a beautiful little spiritual town. And then after my undergrad, I was really trying to heal my physical body. And I did a little bit of journeying, and then went back to California and I studied nutrition in Berkeley. And then a few years later, lots of different things, but then I did a master's at SOAS back in London, and I've studied, that was around kind of indigenous anthropology of health and food, and I kind of traveled around the world looking at what are the kind of the commonalities of indigenous cultures. And that's, the collective, almost, that perspective has really led me, this like desire to seek truth from what kind of exists within the collective consciousness, which we can identify through things that exist cross-culturally. So, whether or not something's found in different spiritual traditions, we find in the Mayas, or we find, it's like we can identify these truths.
Amazing. Where did you travel to?
So I did like a lot of traveling, but I spent a long time in Sri Lanka recently, actually, in India, as well as, different other kind of shorter trips, different places, Mexico and around California, and just kind of learning, and around obviously Europe, and just kind of seeing what are the commonalities of these different cultures in terms of healing and health. And so this is when I kind of identified that, there's sound, sight, breath, movement, touch, like expression. There's ways that there's, traumas or experiences, whatever they want to call it, is just actually physically moved out of the body. So this is where kind of my first interest and understanding of the connection between the physical body and emotional or psychological, spiritual wounding, is really seeing that in all of these cultures, and it's really our truth, it's then, we in the West have disconnected from the mind and body. And so we don't see this connection, but everyone else does. And so, through working with these practices, as well as, that's why, I know you did the story work writing challenge, because it was this writing process, somatically moving it out of the body, as well as shaking and movement. And so as I start identifying that, yes, all of these cultures do the same thing, then there's some truth in that. See what I mean? There's like common truths.
What was the most striking thing to you that they all seemed to have in common?
So as I'm saying it right now, where I am in my work, what's most interesting is the creative visual, the use of creativity and visualization. Because I'm also studying right now transpersonal psychotherapy. So I'm studying this in London, which is really around, creativity, or just what is beyond the personal. But that idea of visualizations, the power of visualizations, and the visual, bringing that shamanic, that shamanic spiritual nature, visual from the body, moving it out energetically. That concept was total head fuck, but like, as it's a truth, which is hard for us to kind of put our head around, that we can visually shift energy. But at the time, the physical work, the shaking, the physical somatic dancing movement practices, those kinds of things were really transformative. That I was like, okay, everyone is moving their body except us. What is this? Dancing around a fire, dancing around a council, creating movement. Okay, this is something clearly we need to do. That's a part of being a human that we're just so disconnected from.
Huh. And not necessarily only for celebration.
No, for physical release. moving out of the body.
Huh.
Yeah.
And there's rituals around that.
Yeah. Rituals, ceremonies, as well as obviously meditation and contemplation. And I'm so grateful that throughout my journey, my relationship with meditation and centeredness is something I can't really identify as a point in time when that really started. I'd say it's from very early. But the new chapter that I'm coming into is really around this guidance, guiding in this meditation state, which is just so naturally what comes in my sessions, is that it's this hypnosis meditation that facilitates this journey somehow. And this is also another aspect that we know is common through all spiritual, is also, cultural. Every community and spiritual tradition has a sense of meditation or grounding or centering. And so now we see, we're understanding the neuroscience of how we are in that kind of construct in the West, but we know the benefits of the EEGs and the different, the different theta brain waves that are accessed and activated. But, this has been in existence for centuries. And there's a reason,
Yeah, I guess that's the other thing that with IFS and why I find it just so groundbreaking compared to any other therapy I've done. And the other types of therapy were helpful for what I needed at the time, like CBT or whatever, talking therapy. But how with IFS, really, because you can't just intellectualize the part, like you can't just kind of like talk around it. It's like stepping into the part, and so you do that through like being hypnosis, which people think is some weird thing, but it's not. It's just like, the state you get in when you're watching a film or whatever. So it's like being more relaxed, so then you can speak from a part of you which, that might be a childlike part. The things it's saying aren't things that you would normally say in like a conversation, even with a therapist. So that's why it's like you're more like in the subconscious, so you're accessing and you're allowing it to feel what it wants to feel, which might be like screaming or, being really aggressive or whatever. And that then relates to the journaling, I think, right? Because the practice that you do where it's like getting everything out and writing whatever you want to say, like, and then destroying it, because some of the stuff might be quite terrifying or might not be what like most of you thinks, but one part of you wants to say, like, I think you use the example of like, I hate my children or something, or it could be even more violent or aggressive than that. Yeah. But it's like, what is that process about? Like really getting it out.
Yeah, because I think it's really important to understand that when you're working with these parts, this is not you. So like I mentioned this archetypal concept. So there's a part that wants to kill you or wants to kill itself. It's a very extreme part that throughout our work, not our work, but I've witnessed that in myself too. Not that I at all want to die, but there's a part as an archetype that life is so hard that it doesn't want to handle that anymore. Because at the time that it was created, and this is what I'm saying, this is a really important thing to understand, is a part is frozen in time at the time of the memory and the trauma. So it's maybe 5. And so the way that it's communicating and the way that it's acting and speaking is from a 5-year-old self. And that part does not know that you are 32. And it thinks that it's back in the day. So, as a child, we know that our subconscious is being informed from those really early years. But also the prefrontal cortex, which allows us to think rationally, quote unquote, will also, be able to use that reflective mind is not developed. So when you're acting, when you're triggered, or when you're acting, when this protector comes out, it's no wonder, because it's 5 and it doesn't have access to that thinking wise brain, which is our self, which is our adult self. And so the things that we say, and it, our tone of voice may change, and the way that we do everything. And the thing is that's so powerful is we don't know until we know. Everything that is until the unconscious becomes conscious. It's like that Jungian phrase. Until the unconscious becomes conscious, it directs our lives, and we call it fate. That's Jung, not Julia. But we don't know that 5-year-old is holding the microphone, holding the lens, is informing our life. The phrase I like to use is altering the stories that we tell. Literally, who's holding the pen? Is it a 5-year-old, or is it your wise adult self? And the thing is until you start gaining awareness of it, of that it's a part, or even knowing it's a part, then it's subconsciously running your life. And then we have no control, we have no empowerment, we have no sense of self, and we're wondering why we're continuing to attract the same relationship. Because it's that part that's so blended with the system. And I do a lot of relationship work, and even like some work with couples. I'm working in this new capacity with this organization, and it's like the couple is coming in, and they're wondering, or if I'm just working with one person and they're looking for a relationship, or they're looking for a new love, and they're like, I keep attracting these toxic, narcissistic relationships, and it's because there's a part that is so burdened that's what happens, and as well as energetically, it's transforming the chemistry of your body.
And what were some of the main parts that you had to unburden?
Well, I guess the relationship that I had with my mother was very informative in terms of, it was very typical, and I don't like these terms, but just for simplicity's sake, almost like narcissist empath dynamic. And so
what does that mean for someone who might not be familiar?
Yeah, so a narcissist is a narcissistic personality disorder. Is a disorder, but again, it's a part. It's a part. So I'm not necessarily, this is my belief, and this narcissistic part is born out of trauma, like a PTSD level of trauma. This is, again, it's my belief, and this is, everyone makes up their own mind about this, and there's a lot of different opinions on this whole subject. But it's really important to know that this is not, just because it's a part does not mean, and you can see it, you can witness it as a part in someone else, does not mean that you have to stay with that relationship. That's really important to know. And then an empath is basically, sounds a little bit vile, but there's often a relationship and a family dynamic where a narcissist, almost, someone with this very strong characteristics, would kind of choose a subject to like almost feed on. Again, it sounds really vile, but it's, in order to get their nourishment, they almost seek the nourishment of another, because they're very very deficient internally in themselves, so they need to seek that from someone else. And because you're the most sensitive, it makes sense. Yeah, so there's a lot of different, I am an empath, which is another word I don't like, but and that kind of means you feel others' emotions. I feel very deeply, and also there's a certain, again, this, I believe this is, or I know, and knowing, not thinking, but knowing, and the more that I go on my journey, the more I know in my body, I know that this is the truth, that everything that I experienced was all perfect. You know, if I didn't, and I'm so grateful for this relationship that I had. I'm so grateful to have the lessons and the pain that obviously it's hard to say that, but if I didn't have, at least I can say this is truth. If I did not have the experiences that I had, everything that happened, I would not be where I am now. And so it's perfect.
And you wouldn't be able to help so many other people.
Yeah.
Or not in the same way.
Yeah. And so that dynamic was apart. So for me, that was this like overly people-pleasing part, you know? That's just giving and never expecting anything. Never expecting to receive. Never expecting that I was worthy of receiving. Or that, you know, all of the limiting beliefs, all of the shadow work that we do. I mean, I had it extremely. Extreme. Like if you met me a few years ago, I'm a very different person than I was. You know, I've done a lot, fuckloads of work, you know, and it's continuing. You know, we are always becoming. You know, if I feel so truth that if we were perfect, if we were done, there would be no point in living. Like there's so much more to come and unpeel and develop and build more and more and more into my most authentic, whole, fullest potential being.
Yeah. Because I guess that would be like full enlightenment, right? If you were just always operating from yourself and not that it's not going to happen. Like you will always have parts that will come up.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but also it's there's always, because, you know, I spiritually believe and had different experiences. You know, self is the fingerprint of God. You know, this is our divine center. This is ever abundant. We also know that's a principle. Abundance, ever expanding. You know, transformation is a principle of our universe. It's a way that everything that we are, it is truth. And so there's never, you know, this whole concept of enlightenment, I think, as if that's like the end. You know, I think it's like never ending. There is no end.
Yeah.
You know, and it's this ever expanding, ever expansive, constant transmutation and learning more, bringing up, highlighting new skills, bringing up things, you know, more abundance, more love, more pleasure, more. I mean, there's just more. We don't know where it ends. It's like that never-ending road, and that's really our road of becoming. So I don't know where it's going.
Yeah, but it gets easier. It's like the really painful stuff you have to unburden, like that a lot of us have to unburden, and like releasing the shame and these, I guess, and it's crazy, the imagery, because I've seen some of them, and it's like they're like trapped in a dungeon or, you know, something so painful, and they've been down there for so long, and then you release them, and then it's like, oh my god, this is like such a breakthrough, and you can't imagine something else, but then there's another part, but it's not as extreme, so it might just be like, I think if you're like, oh yeah, I'm feeling fully healed, like I don't get triggered anymore, just like go and spend time with your family, because then it's like all those triggers come up of like the stupidest stuff. And then it's
mean, ignorance is bliss. Like that's obviously like it's just not true. Basically, that's not true. That's just being ignorant to what is there. But
then that's like an exciting opportunity to grow more.
Yeah. You know, and life just becomes effortless. I mean, not like, I don't mean effortless, but so much more easeful. You know, life just becomes with more ease, more grace, more, it's just not as tough. And that's the other thing, you know, this work, when one part of us, when it's burdening our system, and that's where we are, it affects every aspect of our life. So let's say a perfectionist part affects, you can see how that can manifest in every single area of our life. Our relationship to ourselves, relationship with another, relationship to food, relationship to work. I mean, it's just everything. And so when you find and you really discover, and you work with someone that's very intuitive within this work, and they identify, I really call it like reverse engineering your present experience to find out what are those core parts that are really blocking and informing your entire life. Because it's like, can be one part that's really holding so much influence. And so that's why this work is it's also really, really efficient, especially the way that, the different ways, the tapping and the kind of like EMDR informed stuff that I do and all that, it really gets into those neural pathways in such a deep way. It just transforms so quickly, and almost like, what the hell? Like suddenly my relationship with food or exercise is just like, how the hell did I go from there to here? And I don't even know. I didn't even realize. And suddenly it's just, oh, life is just different. And suddenly I'm no longer wanting to date that same person, that same toxic pattern. So really the first work is looking at your patterns, looking at your current life, and knowing that your current experience, your current reality is really a physical or energetic manifestation of what is inside. So if you just start identifying it, reverse engineer your current experience and find out what's the commonalities. That's our patterning. And then what's underneath the patterning? Who's making the pattern? Well, it's a part. So just keep going backwards. And then find out, okay, what's that origin story? What's that origin wound? Okay, then can we relate differently to that wound? Can we heal that? Can we update that part so it's in current, present 2023 reality rather than 1990 when it was born? Do you see what I mean? And then that one part is then creating your pattern and your current experience. So it's all very, I have a very almost technical mind, a very formulaic kind of mind. So it helps. It helps there is a formula to freedom. And that's what's maddening, is that there's actually a formula. What life becomes available on the other side of this, releasing this pattern, releasing this behavior. And everything that shows up in our reality is a manifestation of, it's like an invitation to look at something that's inside of us. So everything, every single trigger, everything is like perfectly placed for us to look at what is not healed or integrated. And then when we do that, that's liberation.
Yeah, that's why I love it. I think that's the perfect word to describe it, is that it's efficient. It is so efficient. It's like you find the trick, like what's the block? Why I want to do this, change something in my career, but I'm scared, like there's fear. It's like, okay, it's like amazing, great. Let's take that to the session.
Great.
And work through it. And it's like transformation happens. Oh my God. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting as well because I think you told me that about how we're interrelational. So you can do this stuff on your own. There's like Richard Schwartz has the audio book and you can do the meditations on your own and like map out the parts on your own and talk to the parts. Mm-hmm. But there's this added amazing thing when you're doing it in the presence of someone, and that's why which we won't go into, but focusing is really interesting because, but obviously it's like therapy is expensive and like not everyone has access to it. That's why there's like new things that are coming out where you can actually do it with a partner, and it's not about revealing everything, but it's just about being present with someone, and it's crazy because you don't even have to be like, they don't even have to be telling you, or you don't have to talk through everything you're experiencing, especially if it's like something shameful or whatever, but you are just, someone witnessing you like relate to this part and like unburdening is this so transformational.
Yeah, I mean that's what's really like powerful about what really starts shifting things is when you understand that we are relational. Our nervous system is something that we can't conceptualize really. And we can a little bit, but the influence that someone else has, because we are energetic beings. Like, we need to understand this. And our nervous system, if it's not feeling safe, it won't allow you to transform the parts. It won't even allow you to witness the parts. It won't allow you to witness those wounds because it knows more than our cognitive mind that it's not safe. And it's something that you need to be regulated by. And so co-regulation, so we are co-regulated. So when you're with another person, you pick up the energetic frequency of the other person. So if you're in a household that's really traumatic and you're picking up that resonance. But a therapist, when you're working with someone else or just a friend, that resonance allows your the witnessing and the transformation, but it also allows functionally for those memories to be revealed from the body, to be revealed, the nervous system to be like, okay, it's safe to go there. And that takes time for, that's why many people go into therapy, and then when they're 10 years in, then suddenly they remember in truth, it's their nervous system releases a memory from their body that they are now ready to look at. And yeah, so I'm so passionate about making therapeutic, trauma-informed tools available to everyone. I mean, this is a deep passion of mine, and that's why I do a lot of free work. And I'm hoping to expand this. That's another conversation. But unfortunately, there is only so much work you can do by yourself, because we know the chemistry of our body just won't allow it, and rightly so. And so when you're working with a therapist, I mean, that's this other like intangible thing that just happens, where not only therapist, but just another person, that resonance just bellows through somehow. And it allows you to go deeper. And then through the witness of someone else, that's how we heal. That is how we heal, is through someone witnessing those wounds, witnessing that story, witnessing that shame, witnessing that whatever it is. In the light, it transforms. So in the light of witness, it transforms.
And that's so interesting, because that's like what the culture kind of isn't allowing to happen.
Yeah. Which is why we currently live in a narrative of disconnection. Trauma-informed disconnection. We are separate beings. We think we are because of trauma. Trauma fragments separates us. In truth, we are interconnected. And interconnection, in the same way as our body is interconnected, but trauma separates us and fragments us. That's what it does. Exactly the same to the global narrative. And we can see that bellowing out into every form, the way that we connect or disconnect from nature. The way that we create wars with each other is because we see them as different. In the same way that we see our parts as different, but the way to heal is to see them as part of us. So it just bellows out. That's how the individual narrative bellows through the collective narrative. That's why it's a mirror of one of each other. So that's how we transform the collective, is through doing the inner work and reintegrating the truth of interconnection.
Okay, and last question before we wrap up. What is your relationship like now with your family? Because your dad was on this video tutorial thing where you were explaining like how the journaling works, and I just thought it was the sweetest thing, like him really wanting to learn and being so new to it, but being so open.
Yeah, I mean, my relationship with my family, and you're right, he's very sweet, and that was so lovely that he wanted to join. And he's quite on a spiritual journey as well. But yeah, I mean, my relationship with my family is very different than it was. I was like this weird outcast that was really spiritual and always doing this kind of work, and my family is very, very different from that. But I would say finally it's like, I don't know, rubbing off? I don't know. So in the last few years, my certain family members have all started therapy, and, you know, they're kind of going on their journey, and I'm no longer like the crazy Julia, which has also been very healing personally. But yeah, so I have definitely a new relationship with my siblings and my dad, and a new relationship with my mom as well, which is that I'm not in a relationship with my mom. And that's also continuing to evolve. Yeah, and we'll kind of see what, I think that's another part that I really had to work on, is am I worthy enough to choose myself over someone else? And when is this relationship just too toxic? And it took, I've had different periods that I was not speaking to her, and it's been many years now. But the difference is that I no longer feel that yearning. You know, there's a compassion, there's a wish for, I hope that she's happy, and I hope that she finds happiness and love. There's not the tension that there used to be. You know, we speak of like boundaries, like cognitive boundaries. It's not even like that. It's more energetic now. And so yeah, I think I see it as a beautiful new relationship that I have with her, because it is a new relationship I have with her. I don't know what it is in her mind, but for me, yeah, I mean, it's a whole new relationship.
And so what would you go back and tell that little girl who was struggling, or for someone else who might be dealing with really difficult family dynamics?
Yeah, that it's all going to be okay. And you are perfect, you are whole, you are worthy of choosing yourself. And if someone is making you feel not that, that's on them. That's not on you. And you are loved. You are loved. You are not weird. Yeah, I felt all those things. You're not stupid. You're beautiful. And the light can shine on you. The light from your inner light can shine out, and it's safe to allow that light to shine out, even if it makes other people feel not, I don't know, almost like in your shadow by that. Allow that light to shine. Because there was a lot of that opposite of that. You know, everything that I'm saying, I never felt.
But you got here, so it's possible. So
yeah, I mean, and I'm I'm not perfect. I still get triggered. Of course I'm human. I break all the rules. I don't do therapy well. I do everything that everyone else does. But that's beautiful. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, I'm messy as fuck. But I just can come back into myself, and I can have compassion for that. And I can have playfulness with it. And know that I don't need to judge it. It's just a part of me. And like, great. I had a workshop the other day around creativity. And at the end of it was really around expressing. And at the end of it, I really revealed something that was super messy and vulnerable. And I never thought that I would. And I was bawling my eyes out. And I was swearing. I have quite a sailor mouth. And it was really messy. And even in it, I was like, I can't believe I'm saying this. This is so out of character, out of something I haven't done before, or, whatever we think that we are. And, the way that I felt after that and the feedback that I got was really, the how messy you were, how vulnerable you were. Oh my God, it was so empowering. It was so courageous, so impactful. And that is another little encapsulate of a narrative, a reflection, being seen, being witnessed, that is shifting my narrative of, yes, the more messy, the more truthful, the more authentic, the more meaningful and beautiful I am, even if it's all of those messy stuff that I used to criticize or even still do criticize. Really, it's that, it's the magic of who we are. It's a long answer to your short question. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess maybe there's some pressure there as well for therapists to be, I don't know, I think because maybe sometimes people go to them when they are struggling so much and there's something clearly wrong, and then it's like, oh, you're this perfect light who's gonna, but then it's like, no, that's a human as well. And often maybe it's people are attracted into that field because of what they've gone through themselves. But then I don't know if you feel some kind of pressure that it's you have to have it all figured out and you can't be this messy human.
Yeah, there's a lot of different perspectives on this. In the psychotherapeutic world, there's this concept that one approach is that you're an object. Therapist is an object, and we relate. The client is allowed, and healing of their inner relationship happens through the relation in terms of an object. So this idea of therapist, self, we're different. I have quite an opinion on this, where I feel in my own experience, as well as when I work with other people, is when I'm showing, and also in my own therapy, when they show their humanness, their messiness, they break those traditional boundaries of, maybe something you wouldn't say, like an opinion, or oh, I also felt that way. I also had that experience. When my therapist says something like that, obviously there's a line, and it's very curated and respected, and I'm not saying anything that's inappropriate, not at all, but just that tiny comment of I understand. I was there. It's okay. That almost breaking of that therapeutic, traditional in a way thing, which again, there's many, whether or not that's traditional and how, whatever, school you are kind of coming through, what is considered traditional or not is something else. But yeah, it's almost that showing of the humanness that has allowed me to really build that relationship, that therapeutic relationship. So I disagree that I'm, there's a certain amount of work that you are committed to doing, internal work, in order to even be a therapist. It's a lot of work you have to do. You have to be in therapy. You have to do a lot of your own inner work to be able to cultivate the space, to cultivate my own self-energy without being triggered and projecting and, whatever. Being able to cultivate my self-energy to allow, to magnetize your self-energy. That's really where a lot of the healing work happens. And so this idea of perfect, or that we don't have parts, or that maybe one day we won't have any part, that's not even the way that's a misunderstanding. It's not that we're trying to get rid of any of these parts of ourselves. We're just trying to transform them into their true roles to be supportive to the system. So if I was to say that I was this perfect therapist, or in this old way that you're kind of speaking about it, that I was in self all the time, well, that's the goal, is to be self-led. Is for those parts to be conducted by that, or at least be able to come into regulation, to come into, okay, I feel dysregulated, this is something's up, okay, come back to self. Okay.
Yeah, I think the relating as a human point is really important.
Totally.
By the time, so the episode I'm about to release, but it will be out by the time people listening to this, is a psychiatrist at the University of Oxford who is focused on suicide, and he explains, like, as a psychiatrist, like, he has to explain to other young doctors, like, when someone's telling you how they're feeling and they're, feeling suicidal or whatever they're going through, a lot of doctors are just, like, writing everything down, like, they're just, like, blank face. And it's like, he's like, that's a human who's telling you that. Like, you're allowed to respond as a human and show understanding, which was your point. Well,
it's all different schools of thought. I'm studying the transpersonal approach, which is just like kind of a spiritual approach, as well as, the people, the theorists that really inform the work that I do is maybe not in alignment with that concept. That's a whole approach in itself, where, like, the therapist says nothing, shows no emotion. That's an approach, and there's nothing necessarily that's perfect for some clients. I don't find that is very effective in at least as I am right now, in how I'm working. It whether or not this is going to completely change, it may, I don't know. But I really find that showing my humanness to it just a little bit, even just laughing, or like having making some kind of connection, whatever creates that connection. For some, and you get that sense, you get that intuition sense when you're working with someone. In the beginning, it might very much be, yes, with this client, my relationship, how I approach every client is very different. It's all based on them and the relationship that we have. Some, I may be a little bit more, I may pick up that they could do with a comment that makes them feel like understood and like, yeah, I've been there. And then, another client may be, no, this is they're not at that stage, or they don't want to be. That's not something that's going to connect with them, or that's not really a tool to bring out at this moment. So it's all about building up your toolkit, not just working with other people, but just also as a human, building up your inner toolkit to bring out different tools at different times. And that's kind of what, that's how we eventually, really become our own therapist. Because at least my goal is to become redundant. To work with someone enough, and then they can be their own therapist. They can work with their parts. They can witness their parts. They can get to a point where they're not so bombarded with certain parts engulfing them to such a degree that they can work with it themselves.
And I guess that they then, for the witnessing, they know the tools to communicate with friends and family to share things. And who's
safe to share with, who's not safe to share with. Because the amount of healing that just happens through a friend or a parent or whatever, if they're safe, and also tapping into your intuition, building that intuition, which is also in your heart center, your soul, your self, whatever, is also something that happens through this process. So you know, okay, this is a safe person to relate with. This is not. And I mean, that's another like residual effect of like doing deep work, is being able to know the difference.
Amazing. Okay. Is there anything else you want to add, or shall I ask you the last 3 questions?
I mean, I can talk about this stuff, like I said, for I don't know how long we've been speaking. Go ahead.
Okay. Is there a book that had a big impact on your life?
Yeah. Many books. I mean, you mentioned, here, I'm just looking at my bookshelf right now. Yeah, The Body Keeps Score is on here. Untethered Soul. Also, Eastern Mind, Western Body is one that I just recently picked up again. I'm often a lot of books, but like the one that you mentioned, Bessel van der Kolk, as you say it, is a really good introduction to understanding the body. Also, Gabor Mate's work highly informed my work, as well as Peter Levine, which is the somatic experiencing. But the Gabor Mate's newest work, The Wisdom of Trauma, is really fantastic.
He also has a film. Have you seen the film?
Yes.
It's amazing. I think it's like you can just donate to watch it or something. It's available online, but I highly recommend that if people want to get a sense. And he has the prisoners. I love that when it's like he's working with people at a prison and they're sharing. Yeah. I just find that stuff so powerful.
Yeah. I mean, it all just, it's like you say, or, we often say like when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. It's like all of these authors are, I'm a big consumer of information, and it's like different times in my life, different people, like right now I'm really into Carl Jung's work, and just the spiritual connectedness, and as well as, more philosophers like Charles Einstein, so there's a lot of work that it all kind of says the same thing, and I think this general narrative, or that I really believe, is that, trauma and pain disconnects us, fragments us in an individual or collective sense. And then the opposite is the route to healing. And this is just what has guided my life, is these different philosophers, or whatever, coming from whatever different perspective. And it's all kind of informing the same narrative. So, there's a lot of different people, books.
How do you stay grounded?
I stay grounded. I have quite a, I don't know. I mean, my spiritual practice, my spiritual beliefs is definitely what grounds me, lifts, carries, and grounds me, which changes, and, the practices that I use that inform my spiritual practices, I guess, or like keep me grounded, change, and it's become a lot more flexible and less militaristic like it used to be. I used to be like, gotta meditate every day, and that part is no longer. So I kind of do what feels right, but I do meditation. I do a lot of art. I do a lot of writing. Obviously, the story work, this like really strange unconscious somatic thing that you just write and you throw. It's like, and then you throw it away or you delete it. It's this whole thing. I do a lot of that, but I feel like I've built a certain capacity and understanding what tool I need at what time. So sometimes I'm feeling like, okay, I really need to just get this out. And Thierry, the shaking practice, I turn to that. Or sometimes it's like, no, let's just write. Or sometimes it's draw. It's just whatever. It all kind of comes back to the same place. Allows you to release whatever is there or speak to that part to come back to self. Come back to this remembrance of who we actually are.
And what 3 words describe the best version of you?
I would say my true nature, curious, I don't know, maybe soulful. I don't know, what's the word? Creative. 3 is really tough. I feel like there's got to be something a little bit more like yellow or light in that. I need something a little bit more, maybe light color of yellow, maybe. That's what I'm working on, bringing more of that light, allowing that light to shine through. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And where can people find you?
I have a website. I also have an Instagram. My website is juliaascott.com. And my Instagram is juliascott.storywork.